Welcome to this explainer. Listen, whether you're a project manager, a cost estimator, a procurement lead, or an engineer right in the thick of it, I am absolutely thrilled you're here. Today, we're going to trigger a fundamental cognitive shift in how we approach value engineering. Because honestly, if you've ever felt like your cost-saving initiatives are just scraping the bottom of the barrel, or if you're watching your teams get bogged down arguing over tiny incremental discounts, well, this explainer is built exactly for you. We are going to completely rewire how you look at a project specification.
So let me hook you right out of the gate with a question that might actually sting a little. Are you negotiating the exact wrong thing? Just think about your usual approach to cost saving on capital projects. You've got a budget, you've got your bill of materials, and basically you go to war with your vendors, right? You're trying to knock a few percentage points off the price of those materials. But what if you're fighting tooth and nail over the price of a component that literally shouldn't even be in the design in the first place? What if your entire approach to saving money is fundamentally limiting your options?
Section 1. The Cost-Cutting Trap.
Okay, let's dive into this by exploring the flawed reality most teams operate in when they're trying to optimize a project. At the very heart of this cost-cutting trap is something we call component thinking. Component thinking is when you fixate on the physical part exactly as it was specified. You get a drawing or a spec sheet and your brain just instantly locks onto the brand, the vendor, the drawing number, or maybe the legacy grade of that specific part. And because you're fixated on the component, your cost reduction efforts are totally boxed in. You're limited to merely haggling. You are just trying to negotiate harder on the exact same solution.
Here is the perfect, everyday example of component thinking in action. Someone in the meeting room asks, "Hey, can we get this class 300 flange for a cheaper price?" Now, on the surface, that sounds like a proactive cost-saving question, right? But it actually completely blinds you. When you ask that question, the only possible answer you can get is a slightly cheaper class 300 flange. You've completely bypassed the much bigger, much more important underlying question: is a flange even the right answer here? By naming the component, you've just shut down about 90% of your engineering alternatives before the brainstorming has even started.
Section 2. The cognitive shift.
We really need to break out of this trap of the part and shift into the much more liberating world of the purpose. Think about the direct contrast here. The old way, component thinking, has you staring blindly at a class 300 flange. The new way, function thinking, has you looking at that exact same connection but defining it strictly by what it actually does. In this case, contain fluid and enable access. Function thinking abstracts the component into its true purpose. Suddenly, you aren't tied to a heavy piece of metal with 16 bolts. You're looking at a pure requirement, and there are dozens of ways to contain fluid and enable access that don't involve a traditional flange at all.
So the absolute crucial takeaway here is this: naming the component closes the door. Naming the function keeps the door wide open. When you name the function, you open that door to completely different, lower cost, and honestly, far more elegant engineering alternatives that you would have otherwise entirely missed. Maybe it's a welded joint if access isn't actually needed. Maybe it's a completely different clamp hub principle borrowed from subsea engineering. But you only get to those brilliant solutions if you keep the door open by naming the function first.
Section 3. The two-word discipline.
Now, you can't just tell an engineering team, "Hey guys, go think about functions," and expect it to work. You have to enforce it. And we do this using a strict, non-negotiable rule. I want you to treat this not as a polite suggestion, but as a rigid constraint. Every single function in your project must be defined in exactly 2 words. Step 1, an active verb. Step 2, a measurable noun. That is it. Contain fluid, transfer heat, regulate flow. By putting this rigid constraint on your team, you actually breed deep creativity. It strips away all the camouflage that hides bad design choices.
So why does this super strict phrasing work so incredibly well? Well, first off, it forces brevity. If you only get 2 words, you absolutely have to strip out the design detail. Transfer heat survives a redesign. Run 316 stainless tubes does not, because that second one, that's already a solution. Second, using a measurable noun like fluid, heat, or pressure allows you to attach a real number and a real cost to that function later on down the line. And third, it ensures an active voice. Words like provide or support are passive. They're vague. An active verb names an action the design must actually perform, giving you a crystal clear target to engineer towards.
Section 4. Fiction versus true function. In the real world, specifications are absolutely full of solutions masquerading as functions. So let's put this into practice with a rapid-fire test. Say you see a requirement to install a bypass valve. That is fiction. It's a component solution wearing a disguise. The true function is simply regulate flow. How about match legacy spec? That is definitely not a function. That is a habit. It's usually an unwanted secondary requirement that just drives up costs. The true function there is just contain fluid. And what about fit a redundant transmitter? Again, that's a specific design choice. The true function is monitor condition. Every single time you spot one of these fictions, you have to dig down until you hit the bedrock of the true function underneath it.
Now, if you're ever unsure if you found a true function or just another disguised solution, you use the ultimate test. Does it survive being asked why it exists without accidentally dictating how the engineering must be done? A true function tells you exactly why it's there. If your requirement is already telling you how to do the job, you haven't abstracted it enough. You literally need to keep asking why until that how disappears completely.
Section 5. Opening the innovation door.
It's one thing to understand this conceptually, right? But the financial and strategic payoff on an actual project is massive. By making this cognitive shift, you instantly expose hidden cost drivers that were disguised as absolute requirements. To put that into perspective, in a real EPC piping package for a polyethylene unit, the team found that match legacy spec was actually driving them to use 6 different flange and gasket standards. Insane, right? But by stripping that away and focusing purely on the true function, contain fluid, they realized those extra standards were totally unnecessary. They challenged the inherited habit of the component, they consolidated from 6 standards down to just 2, and ended up saving roughly 15% on piping material and expediting costs. Plus, doing that standardizing unlocked bulk buy tendering and drastically reduced vendor lead times. The whole shebang. All because they stopped staring at the part and started looking at the function.
Let's just pause for a second here. Name the function, not the part. Seriously, if you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer today, please let it be this exact quote. Name the function, not the part. It is the single most important habit you can develop in value engineering. It's the key that keeps your options open. It prevents you from getting locked into super expensive legacy habits, and it forces your team to engineer real solutions rather than just lazily doing what was done last time.
I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought. I want you to go look at the very next specification crossing your desk today. Just read it carefully. Does it name the part or does it name the purpose? Because if it names the part, you're already leaving money and innovation on the table. Apply this paradigm shift today. Turn those parts into purposes, use that 2-word discipline, and just watch how wide the door to innovation truly opens. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer.